Hello and welcome to rural Texas here on RFD. Export markets are increasingly important to farmers, ranchers, and rural communities in Texas. We simply grow too much to be consumed within the borders of the United States. In an effort to understand these markets and the people of the lands that drive them, the Texas Farm Bureau scheduled 3 global agricultural education tours or trade missions during 2006. As we come to you today, 2 of those, to South America and to China, have been completed. A third, to Canada, will be launched soon. With me today are 2 members of the Texas Farm Bureau staff. Mike Barnett, the editor of Texas Agriculture Magazine, went on the trip to South America. And Tom Nicoletti, our rural Texas senior reporter, went along on the trip to China. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Briefly, what were your impressions of the value of a farm organization taking part in a groundbreaking effort like these 2 trips? Mike, you first.
The importance of trade, the importance of the World Trade Organization talks, the importance of knowing who your competition is and what they are doing, all that becomes crystal clear when you visit these foreign countries. These farmers there and here are all after the same thing, and that's world markets.
Tom, you agree with that?
Yeah, I echo Mike's feelings on that, Gene. China this fiscal year is going to be the number 4 market worldwide, surpassing the European Union for U.S. farm exports. So it was very important for Texas farmers and ranchers to journey to this Asian country. The Chinese market is just huge beyond comparison, with 1.3 billion people in their country. That's their population, the largest country in the world, which is economically a capitalistic country, but politically it is a communist country. And as we'll see later in the program, Texas producers, for the most part, view Chinese farmers and ranchers as partners rather than competitors in the world agricultural trade market.
Well, we look forward to a very lively and interesting discussion today. When we come back, we'll show you some of the sights and sounds of agriculture in Argentina and Brazil. We'll talk about what was learned and how it'll be put to work back here in Texas. We'll be back right after this.
Decades ago, Americans started leaving the farm for other professions and pursuits. The farmers that stayed fed America and much of the world. Today we grow more food than ever, and it's better, safer, and healthier. We live in the land of plenty, thanks to modern agricultural technology and the skills of our farm and ranch families. This message is brought to you by the Texas Farm Bureau, the voice of Texas agriculture. Today's abundance of food and fiber is brought to you by America's farmers and ranchers.
Are you a Texan? Are you a farmer or a rancher? Is Texas agriculture important to you? Do you care about the future of rural Texas? Perhaps you're concerned about property rights, stewardship of the land, and the next generation of farm and ranch families. If any of this describes your thinking, then you belong in the Texas Farm Bureau. Make your voice heard in the organization that is the voice of Texas agriculture. Call your County Farm Bureau office or visit us on the web at www.txfb.org.
Welcome back to rural Texas as we examine the trade missions undertaken by the Texas Farm Bureau to South America and later on in the program to China. Mike, I've heard you say that a trip like this was really kind of a dream come true for an agricultural communicator like yourself. Why is that?
To me, it's experiencing the different cultures in Argentina and Brazil, visiting with the people, getting to know them, and trying to understand why the agriculture producers there do the things that they do. What was interesting to me was that agriculture in Argentina, the part that we saw, is very modern, could be plunked down right in the middle of Ohio, and nobody would ever know the difference. Agriculture in Brazil, it's a whole different world, and it's one that I've never experienced.
In what ways was Brazil different? There's a lot of concern among Texas agricultural producers that some of the things that we grow here, that Brazil has so many natural advantages that they could capture many of the markets that we covet.
If Brazil ever gets its infrastructure in place, if the government learns to take agriculture serious and sees its potential, Brazil can feed the world.
Well, how about Argentina? Are they in a similar position? Do they have the productive capacity?
Argentina has a very modern, productive agriculture. Their problem is they do not have the room to expand.
Texas farmers and ranchers certainly have sort of a love-hate relationship with government. Government is needed for certain things, but those producers in Argentina, they have problems of their own.
They do have problems, Gene. The government heavily taxes agriculture exports. It's an easy way for them to get money. The Argentina economy is in pretty bad shape, but it is recovering. The beef operations in Argentina are very impressive. The trouble is the government wants to keep the beef there to feed the people, and they put an onerous export tax on the beef. The beef quality is very good. It could compete in world markets, but the government chooses to keep the beef there to feed their people.
Does that have any prospect of changing? I suppose that'd come as good news to our Texas beef producers.
Well, it is good news for our Texas beef producers, and another thing that's good news for Texas beef is that most of the productive land in Argentina is going away from the cattle and into the soybeans.
Texas soybean producers know that Argentina is a major producer, or at least potentially could be. So what's the story with Argentina and soybeans?
Argentina farmers have found a lucrative market in growing Roundup Ready soybeans. They're expanding their acreage. It's a very efficient crop for them to grow. They have the climate, they have the soil conditions to make that work. In addition to that, they have the port facilities on the Paraná-Uruguay River, 250 miles upstream, that can handle these beans, get them exported at a reasonable price. And that crushing and exporting facility is growing also.
As we go along, we are, of course, looking at some of the sights and sounds that Mike recorded when he took the trip to Brazil and Argentina. And right now, we're going to hear from one of the participants in the trip.
These countries politically are still growing, and as they become a little more adept at helping their producer and realization that agriculture is such an integral part of their gross national product, and supporting those farmers and helping them getting their products to market. Until that time, I think the producers here are going to struggle a bit.
And that, of course, was recorded on location in South America during the Texas Farm Bureau Global Agricultural Education Tour. Mike, back to Brazil. Much fear in this country among producers that Brazil could become an awesome competitor, a competitor that could overwhelm even the production as good as it is here in the United States. What's preventing that from happening?
Basically, the infrastructure. There's two means of getting products to market in Brazil, and one is by road, and the roads, if you get out in the middle of the country where a lot of the production is, are horrendous. The other is by river transport, and that mainly is the Amazon River. You get past that, there's just no way to get the products out.
And you took a trip down the Amazon. That must have been, as my teenage sons would say, very cool.
That was extremely interesting to me. We stayed in a city called Santarina. It's 400 miles upstream on the Amazon River, and about the only way to get to it is by airplane or by boat. There is one road going to it. It connects to a very productive area of Brazil, but most of that road is dirt, and it's impassable during the rainy season, which is a lot in Brazil.
What are the prospects of Brazil fixing some of these infrastructure problems?
What was interesting is we had a trade mission visit Brazil 2 years ago, and virtually no progress has been made in those last 2 years.
So for now, they have an enormous capacity and very little means of actually realizing its promise.
There's a port facility in Santarina operated by Cargill. They built that port facility because the government told them the infrastructure would be improved. A road from the major growing area would be completed to the port facility. That hasn't happened, and the operator of that facility doesn't have much hope that it's going to happen in the near future.
Okay. Let's take another look at some of the interviews that were shot on location in South America by Mike and the other Farm Bureau staff that went along.
I guess probably the big advantage here, which is something I hadn't realized, is where the Toggle and the Amazon rivers come together, that it's deep enough they can bring large vessels in here and fill them with products and then ship it to whatever country that they're designated to. I didn't realize that the river was that large and that deep that it could handle this type of vessels, even though they are quite a distance from the ocean.
In Argentina, I was impressed with the rotational system they were using, growing out steers on alfalfa. They had a cow-calf herd also that was utilized to produce calves for feeding and for replacement. Here in Brazil, I saw just a few cattle. We saw a lot of bean handling, soybean handling equipment that was fairly large, well put together, well suited for exporting their products.
Mike, what about the people of both Argentina and Brazil? What do they think of Americans, and what do they think of American agricultural products?
In both countries, they realize that we are a very serious competitor. They know who the competition is, and they're striving, especially in Argentina, to become as efficient and as good as we are at producing. In Brazil, you find the same thing. They just don't have the infrastructure to get those products to market.
We need to touch a little bit on ethanol. Here in the United States, we're taking baby steps toward ethanol fuel. Brazil pretty much has that figured out, don't they?
Brazil has been in the ethanol business for a long time. In fact, they are self-sufficient in fuel. Now the difference is they use sugar cane instead of corn. Sugar cane is much more efficient. They have much fewer cars than we have in the United States, so it's much easier for them to reach that goal than it is for us.
Well, we'll see how the information gathered on your trip is used back here in Texas. And when we come back, we'll be talking to Tom Nicoletti about his trip to the world's most populous nation, China. Back in just a minute.
Agriculture is Texas' renewable industry, not only growing food and fiber for Texas families, but creating 1 in 5 Texas jobs. I'm Mike Barnett, editor of Texas Agriculture. In our publication, you'll read profiles of the trendsetters of agriculture in the Lone Star State. We'll bring you profiles of farmers and ranchers surviving and thriving on the land and the issues shaping the future of rural Texas. Read all about it in Texas Agriculture, an exclusive benefit of your Texas Farm Bureau membership.
Attending college is a goal of many young people, but getting on campus is very expensive. That's where Texas Farm Bureau can help. As members of the Texas Farm Bureau, students can compete for thousands of dollars in scholarships through Texas Farm Bureau's annual statewide contests, Free Enterprise Speech, Talent Find, and Miss TFB. The Texas Farm Bureau, making a difference for agriculture and rural Texas.
On Rural Texas today, we're traveling the world a bit, visiting South America, Argentina and Brazil, and now China, which was the second of the Texas Farm Bureau's global agricultural education tours. Texas Farm Bureau President Kenneth Diersky was along on that trip to China, and our senior reporter, Tom Nicoletti. Tom, China is kind of an interesting study these days. Its government is totalitarian, communist, one of the last remaining communist dictatorships in the world, and yet its economy is booming on the principles of free enterprise. How is that explained? Did anything during the trip shed any light on that?
Oh, quite a bit, Gene. We traveled to 3 of the largest cities in China, Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, among others, and capitalism is just booming there. There's a lot of construction, of course, people everywhere, with it being the largest country in the world, and especially Hong Kong looks very Western. I mean, you go to Hong Kong and you think that you might be in a country, or rather a city that you would see somewhere in the United States. From a political standpoint, yeah, it's very totalitarian. The government owns all of the land in China. So that's one of the restrictions that the people in China have these days, even in 2006.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your trip.
Well, as you had mentioned, President Kenneth Diersky of the Texas Farm Bureau led the delegation of 8 farmers and ranchers from across the state of Texas. They went to China. They saw a wide array of agricultural production. They did learn that the infrastructure in China, surprisingly, is very, very good. Their highway systems are just beyond compared to some other countries, such as what Mike had mentioned earlier about Brazil. And the Chinese people are very hardworking people. The conclusions that were drawn by the farmers from Texas was that China is more of a partner in agricultural trade rather than a competitor.
This Asian nation's economy is very closely linked to the United States in terms of agricultural export-import trade. For this reason, Texas Farm Bureau leaders traveled to China as part of a continuing global agricultural education tour.
There are opportunities here for possibly trade, and they like to export, and we like to export. So there's an opportunity that we can meet with some of the government officials and explore those opportunities.
Specifically, the Texas farmers and ranchers focused on China to better understand the potential for increased global agricultural trade between both countries. Politically, China is a one-party communist state, but Western capitalism is evident in the country's major cities.
In terms of economics, this is, at first glance, as capitalistic as any other society that I've seen. It's very much a profit-oriented, an investor-rewarded kind of an economy, not what we would equate with the communism of 30 or 40 years ago.
China's labor force stands at 583 million people. The Chinese population continues to grow at 10 to 12 million people per year. Cities are densely populated, and urban sprawl is taking up farmland much like it is in the United States. There are minimal social services in rural areas, and Chinese farmers' income is about 1/4 of what is earned by urban residents. However, 2 years ago, the Chinese government began a farm assistance program that helps agricultural producers purchase farm equipment and seed.
2 years ago, the farmers protested against their treatment, and to give them the opportunity to stay on the farms, the government allowed them to continue to farm, but they had a choice now of what they planted. And they also were released from having to pay any taxes to compensate the difference between the cultures in the rural area and the city dwellers.
China's agriculture is very diverse. Cotton and rice are major crops. Corn, wheat, and garlic were also among the commodities seen firsthand by the Texas producers. They learned that average Chinese crop yields are very comparable to U.S. production. For example, corn yields can range from 160 to 180 bushels per acre. Wheat harvest yield 80 to 100 bushels to the acre.
We're here now about right after wheat harvest and a little after corn planting. And they'll plant in that stubble. They'll either have a one-row planter or they'll do it by hand. It's really labor intensive.
What I have really noticed, and the biggest difference in agriculture, is that this is all minimum till to no till. They have just virtually no tractors to plow these fields.
The Texas visitors toured the largest textile mill in the world. The mill consumes 40% of all U.S. cotton exports. The Farm Bureau Group was given some staggering numbers regarding China's cotton industry. More than 18 million households are involved in cotton production, while there are more than 10,000 cotton gins scattered across the country. About 90% of the cotton is irrigated, hand-picked at harvest, yielding about 2 bales per acre. All of the crop is BT cotton. Lush fields of rice could be seen in the Chinese countryside. On average, yields range from 6,700 to 7,000 pounds per acre. One cultivation practice utilized by China's farmers is to plant rice, rotate it back into wheat, and then plant back to rice again. From a technology standpoint, farms and ranches in China have not advanced like the more westernized cities of this nation.
There may be 50 people in a 15 to 20 acre area all working the same field. The technology that they have, there are people pulling plows just like an ox or a mule that we used 70 or 80 years ago.
Another segment of Chinese agriculture that lacks 21st century technology is the cattle industry. During a visit to a feedlot, the Texas producers concluded the standards and practices utilized would not be acceptable in the United States.
Well, compared to our feedlots in the Panhandle in Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, up through there, this was totally different. Each animal is brought in and tied individually, and this is one of the larger feedlots. He feeds about 200. They're watered one time a day.
The U.S. ag producers met with a number of Chinese government and United States embassy officials. They traveled to the hydropower capital of China to see Three Gorges Dam, one of the world's largest dams, built to control flooding from the Yangtze River and to generate hydroelectric power. At Hong Kong's modern terminals, the Texas farmers and ranchers saw the world's largest container port facility, which ships goods around the globe. By the end of the 2-week trip, The Texans were looking at China as more of a partner in agricultural trade rather than a competitor.
I really don't look at China as being competition. We're really partners. We work together, especially regarding our exports. We have to have exports. We produce more cotton than we can use, and obviously China does not produce as much as they need to keep their big textile industry going. So I'm very excited about the prospects of business with China.
I think they'll have a need for food products in the future. Fiber production, I think they'll be a good customer of ours if we can maintain some quality that they like, and as long as we can do that and get them a product when they want it, I think they'll be a good friend of ours in agriculture.
A few final notes, Gene, about China. The average farm size, very small, only about 1 to 3 acres. The Farm Bureau entourage primarily looked at farms in the eastern part of the country. That was pretty much our tour. And we saw farms, not very much livestock at all. The livestock is pretty much in the northern and western parts of the country. A couple other notes: more than half of the population of China, 600 to 700 million people, live in rural areas and on farms. So that's a tremendous amount of their population that live in the rural areas. Their socioeconomic system, basically it's a lower and upper class in China. There really is no middle class.
So what we have here are two nations with respect to Brazil and China who are making a bid for economic superpower status, and China would appear to be a little further along. Lessons learned, messages for farmers and ranchers as a result of these trips. What would you say, Mike?
Brazil will become a competitor with the U.S. They have very small amount of their land in production. They have the potential to put much more of their land into production. They will be a competitor if the government gets the infrastructure built.
How about China, Tom?
Again, I don't know that they're as much of a competitor as, say, Brazil might be to the United States because they're lacking on the farms in advancements. We didn't see a lot of farm equipment on these farms. It was a lot of hand labor. It's very primitive. It would almost be a throwback to what agriculture might have been here in the United States at the turn of the 20th century, about 100 years ago or so. And so even though China is a huge country and there is a lot of land, there's also a lot of land in China that is certainly not even used for agricultural production whatsoever.
Well, Tom, Mike alluded to the fact that Brazil is a major player in ethanol, and now we know that Texas is taking its first baby steps toward introducing fuel ethanol here in Texas, and you covered that recently.
Yes, Gene. Throughout Texas at 5 locations, what were called E85 pumps opened at a major retailer in the state at HEB's. E85 is a blend of 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline. And this is a whole new market for ethanol here in Texas, and let's just go ahead and take a look at what we covered.
E85 is now available at 5 HEB fuel pumping stations located throughout Central Texas.
Yes, it is.
News conferences unveiled the new pumps and a new era in Texas energy. E85 provides many benefits. Customers of flexible fuel vehicles will find E85 to be much less expensive per gallon than unleaded gasoline.
Well, today it's 40 cents cheaper, and we're going to guarantee to keep it 30 cents cheaper per gallon than regular unleaded.
The ethanol in E85 is an alcohol that is used as a gasoline additive. Ethanol is made primarily from corn and other grain products grown in Texas and the U.S.
So this is a win-win for us. HEB wins because they get more consumers here. The corn farmer of Central Texas actually gets another market for his actual output.
This renewable and domestically produced fuel will allow Texas motorists to reduce their dependence on foreign oil. E85 burns cleaner than gasoline, with as much as 46% fewer greenhouse gas emissions.
Ethanol provides a good bit more octane, and also it cuts the emissions of air pollutants, things like nitrogen oxide and particulate matter, which is a great thing for the environment, especially in areas like Dallas and Fort Worth, where we have ozone non-attainment problems.
The Midwest is still the leader in ethanol usage, but more than 450,000 Texas drivers who already own flex fuel vehicles now have the opportunity to travel on I-35 and purchase E85 as an alternative fuel source.
Thank you, Tom. Hopefully, Texas consumers will be trying E85 in flex fuel vehicles, but not every vehicle on the road is a flex fuel vehicle, so be careful to look that up before you try it. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We traveled a bit around the world, and hopefully we learned some things about those that will compete with us and the customers for our agricultural products in Texas. We thank you for joining us today on Rural Texas, and one more word, this is still a hot, dry state. Be careful with fire. Join us next time on Rural Texas.